I think we're all set. Well, welcome to the Marketing on Academy, very first ever Facebook Live roundtable. So we have been having our roundtables in a traditional format on Thursday mornings via Zoom, and recently we decided to reinvent this program and to offer it through our Facebook group in a live format and bring in very special guests. Like for today, we have Cameron Macht, which we'll get into. But on the first Thursday of the month, we will now be doing our Facebook Live format. And this is also an opportunity for us to record these very valuable conversations for our small businesses and to put them up on our YouTube channel as well, so they can be referenced in the future for anybody that needs them. So the Red Star Marketing on Academy, we are a program that helps. We work with small businesses. We want to see small businesses thrive. We are unlike any traditional marketing program, and our alumni would be very willing to help explain that and tell you more about it. But we work with Startup Bootcamp and Business Reinvention. And again, the whole goal is just to help our small businesses thrive, maybe to think outside the box, to connect them to a community of other entrepreneurs who are going through challenges and struggles just like they are, because we understand as an entrepreneur, it can oftentimes feel isolating and lonely. So to have a community of people together to create conversation and to answer questions is very valuable. And we feel very privileged to be able to work with entrepreneurs around central Minnesota and with our partners, the Southwest Initiative Foundation, that help make it all happen. So for our very first Facebook Live Marketing on Academy roundtable, we have Cameron Macht joining us. So Cameron works with the Minnesota Employment and Economic Development, or DEED. He has been with DEED for a few years, many years.
Yeah.
And Cameron, you're kind of a unicorn in your field, I feel, in that you're very smart, you're very analytical, you understand the research, but also you have a gift of communicating it with people like me who don't always understand spreadsheets and analytics and all of those things. In my personal past, you've helped me when Stacey Roberts and I started our small business. You helped us better understand the demographics of who our target customers are. If our business was actually going to work in this area, which, you know, a lot of people when you start a business say it's probably not. So you kind of helped give us the information and the data that gave us the confidence, but also the ability to get funding that we needed to move forward. So I thank you for that. And also Cameron joined us recently for our Love Your Work retreat with our small businesses and gave a presentation that we'll be talking about today of understanding our workforce changes and the real numbers behind what's happening in the availability of finding people to work in our businesses. So if you want to introduce yourself a bit, and then we'll get into what we're talking about today.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. I have been with DEED for a really long time, 20 years now. So I started in 2002 and worked with Betsy actually right away. And I remember when you guys were starting that business. So like all of those are happy memories from my work here. So I work in DEED's Labor Market Information Office. We're actually headquartered in St. Paul, but I live out here. I actually live in Raymond, so not too far from here. It was a nice short drive in this morning, which is awesome. We have 5 regional analysts stationed around the state, so anyone, anywhere that's needing this type of information can reach out to us, and I have that included in the slide at the end. I appreciate you setting the expectations really high, but actually the whole team operates the same way. We're all pretty easy to get along with, try and answer questions and be helpful and understand the question behind the question, because a lot of times just sharing data isn't enough, but to understand what the data actually means. So I have a quick presentation, and we can kind of launch into questions as we work through it, if that works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Betsy, do you want to introduce yourself as well? I feel like everybody knows you, but then when you get out to the YouTube channel, you should probably introduce yourself too.
Sure. I'm Betsy Bonema. I am the founder of the Red Star on Academy. And as Cameron said, I've got to work with him really early on in my career, and we've just, I think, stayed in touch, and I just find you to be a really amazing resource. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
All right, so Cameron, what we've been hearing a lot from our small businesses, probably, what do you think, Betsy? Like within the last 6 months, 7 months, a lot. People are really challenged right now to find employees and to build their teams, and we hear that our entrepreneurs are feeling exhausted and they need help and they are not finding it, and we've heard multiple reasons behind what that might be. But a lot of what we're hearing, we we felt it would be extremely beneficial to understand the real reason behind our workforce and the real reason why it might be difficult to hire in a way that we've traditionally been trying to hire. And so looking at new ways, new ideas, but before we can do that, we need to understand what's happening with our demographics.
Yeah, I think context is really helpful. And so usually the way that we do presentations too is just to try and share a little data on the front end, get everybody kind of on the same page so that we all understand what the numbers are, so there aren't at least disagreements about that. We can still have disagreements about what they mean or whether or not people want to work or things like that. But at least we can say, here we know we have X number of people, and we know that the labor force participation rate is X and the unemployment rate is X. And once you know all that stuff, then you can kind of figure out, well, what do we do about it? How do we recruit in this situation, or how do we retain in this situation? And Indeed has resources for that as well, not just the Labor Market Information Office. They have other staff who are available free of charge. You've already paid for us through your tax dollars, so you might as well benefit from the resources that we have. But people located in career force locations that can come in and help with writing job descriptions, holding job fairs, linking them up with underserved populations that might be looking for work, people who've been laid off through no fault of their own, all those different types of resources. So
that is an incredible hot tip of the day.
I was just going to say that. We're going to maybe include that link.
Absolutely.
So we can...
careerforcemn.com. We got like 50 locations across the state, but even if you don't go into a location, you can just call one of our staff people and they can walk you through it virtually, or they can come out and meet you, and that's just still just scratching the surface of what Deed does. We do vocational rehabilitation and state services for the blind, and lots of other resources as well to tap into. But yeah, careerforcemn.com.
It's in the comments.
All right.
Sweet.
So on it. We're on it.
That's quick.
This morning. All right, so let's start with the data. Let's start with the information.
So this is probably more fun if there's like a room full of people, because you guys have seen this already. But one of the ways that I like to challenge people is, a lot of times there are differences between what people's perception is and what reality is. And so I like to ask questions during presentations, like, how many people do you think live in Minnesota, and how many of those people are actually in the labor force? And so again, we did this, and maybe people are guessing online what they think the answer is. But we'll get all kinds of wild guesses, from 1 million people to 8 million people and everywhere in between. But in Minnesota, there's about 3 million workers total. Is that more or less than in 2020? We talked about this before too. It's actually down. So the pandemic really kind of shifted the way our labor force trajectory was going. We had been adding workers for 45 years, and I'm sure even before that, but as long as we have recorded history through our programs, just kind of steadily gaining workers. And we had been talking about for quite a while how the population is aging. There's going to start to be some of these labor force shortages. And starting in about 2017, we made that shift where we started having more jobs than we had available people. And so this tight labor market was already
That started
here.
in 2017.
2017, yep, was when we were so we do something called the job vacancy survey, keep track of how many positions are currently posted at employers in the state of Minnesota. And that was kind of the tipping point. Once we got past that, it was like, okay, this is going to be here for a while because, again, the population is aging. And as it ages, labor force participation rates go down by age group. And so as this baby boom generation keeps moving into that 65 and older age category, we were starting to see a real slowdown in our labor force growth. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later too. But so this isn't a new thing. Like, dropping by this much is new. The pandemic changed things, but this tight labor market is going to be with us for a while. So
You saw it coming.
yeah, we've been talking about it for a long time, but we aren't the most interesting people to listen to. And we weren't sounding alarms or anything like that. We were still expecting to see projected labor force growth, and we still expect to see projected labor force growth over the next 10 years, but it's just at a much slower rate. And I don't know if businesses were able to react to that as quickly as the pandemic forced them to react to that. It was kind of a slow burn that was happening from 2017 until 2020, and then 2020 happened, and things got way, way more difficult. And there's been some good things that have come out of that too. So, wages have been going up, especially for workers at the lower end of the wage scale. That's been a really, well, I guess it depends on your point of view, but from our point of view, that's been a really good thing. And traditionally underserved populations have been able to make headway in the labor force now too. Teenagers have been extremely helpful in growing our labor force the last couple of years. So
when you say underserved, can you elaborate on that?
Well, so Minnesota has a lot of good things about our economy, but we also have some pretty significant racial disparities in Minnesota. So the gap between the white unemployment rate and the black unemployment rate, or the American Indian unemployment rate, is significant, and it has been for quite some time. And it had been narrowing because the labor market was so tight. Like the gap between the two was getting smaller and smaller all the way up until 2020, and then things kind of got thrown into disarray again. The pandemic impacted communities of color more heavily than it did white communities, just because of the industries that communities of color tend to work in. So leisure and hospitality and retail trade and transportation and all those areas, they were hit a little bit harder. Healthcare and social assistance, they were hit a little bit harder on the outset. And so, unemployment rates fluctuated way more for black workers than they did for white workers. And, especially when you get into greater Minnesota, it's just less racially diverse in the first place. So all those challenges just got amped up during that time period. So we got about 3 million, almost 3.1 million workers. So there's a really interesting slide that I'll show you, I think, right after this one, but just for context too. So we got almost 3.1 million workers, only about 65,000 unemployed workers. Those are people who don't currently have a job but are actively seeking. So there are other people who have dropped out of the labor force entirely.
Right. They're
not counted in that group. So we have a really low unemployment rate, 2.1%. It's actually the lowest of the 50 states in the United States. We're tied with Utah right now, but this summer, so June and July, we were at 1.8%. That's the lowest rate in the history of Minnesota, and also the lowest rate in the history of any state ever.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what's unique about Minnesota?
Well, it's this really, really tight labor market. Some other states have done a little bit better at bouncing back, regaining all the workers that were lost during the pandemic.
But why is ours tighter? Are there circumstances in our state? Is it the population demographics?
Yeah, the demographic changes are a big part of that, because the older population, and I'll give you some details about that too, dropped out of the labor force and hasn't come back at a high enough rate. This 25 to 54-year-old group, the prime working years, they've had some challenges with finding childcare and deciding whether or not it's even worth it to keep working because of the cost of childcare. Like, that industry needs some help. You do see a lot of efforts now focused on childcare. There's grants now that a lot of economic development agencies are putting out to try and encourage more childcare availability in areas, but it's still just a really hard industry to make it work. The costs don't line up very well with the market value.
Yeah.
So, but we also just have, a really strong, really diverse economy overall, and so, Minnesota's economy is doing well. I mean, I think a lot of employers would like to hire a lot more people. We just don't have enough people to fill it. So our economy could be doing even better than it already is if we could just find the people to
so
fill those jobs.
The low unemployment is a signal that we have a strong economy. Is that what you're saying? So
Yeah.
it's something to feel good about, not bad about.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So then when we did this, you had kind of shared with me where your client base is primarily from, and so I just have this data here too for the Southwest Initiative Foundation. That's an 18-county region in the lower left-hand side of the state, going up as far as like Candy, Ojai, and Meeker and McLeod County, and then all the way down to like Sioux Falls, so Rock, and a county in the far southwest corner. So about 146,500 workers just within in that region. That's also down, and you can see it's down, more significantly than what we've seen statewide, and that's also due to demographics. So this part of the state is older than the state as a whole, a much higher percentage there, 65 years and over, and that's the group that is dropped out and hasn't come back quite as quickly, especially the back end of that baby boom generation, the 55 to 64-year-olds who were able to retire. At the time, the stock market was doing well. It maybe wasn't as vital right away to get back to work, and so maybe they realized, hey, I can make this work. I enjoy, not having to punch the clock, and so now long term that might still change. We believe up until this point the labor force participation rates were increasing for older age groups. People were more likely to stay in work, whether it was coming back in and working part-time or, maybe doing some consulting work for the company that they used to work for, or, just being a greeter at a retail store. All of those were good options for people to stay active. So, long-term odds are those people will come back in, but we just don't know when. It may depend on whether or not there ends up being a recession, and if the stock market continues to go down, or if inflation continues to go up. All those things can have an impact on when and if people decide to come back in. So then just specifically Candy, Ojai County, which is where we are right now, where we all live. Candy, Ojai County has about 23,000 workers. That was also down in comparison to pre-pandemic times, and may or may not be impacted in the same way as the state overall. So I just want to share some information really quickly about the strength of Minnesota's job creation engine, and I think this will help give some context to the idea of, nobody wants to work anymore. Certainly there probably are some people who don't want to work anymore, but it's not who people, when they say that phrase, I don't think it's who they think it is. So this chart, if you can see it online, this shows the change in the size of Minnesota's labor force. That's the blue line between 1976, which is when our records start for the local area unemployment statistics program, and then going all the way through 2021. We don't have annual 2022 data yet, but we will have it soon, just in a couple months here. But either way, so between 1976 and 2019, Minnesota added almost 1.3 million additional workers. So if you look back in 1976, we had a smaller total population, had about 1.85 million workers at that time. By 2019, we had 3,129,843 workers. So just a substantial amount of growth, really fast labor force growth over that time frame. And because it was growing so fast, all these employers in Minnesota were able to find, talented, hardworking people to fill all the jobs that they had, and we had tremendous employment growth, especially in the 1990s. But if you see that orange line, so which is on the right-hand axis, is the number of unemployed workers in the state of Minnesota. You can see there was a big spike that happened during the Great Recession, 2008 to 2010 there, and then kind of steadily worked its way down. But we added 1.3 million additional workers. We have fewer unemployed workers now than we had 45 years ago, which is just mind-blowing. So everybody who came into the labor force got a job. Everybody is working. So the idea that people don't want to work, just to me, doesn't hold water. Everybody who's coming in is getting a job, is getting placed. We've had tremendous success in growing Minnesota's economy during that time frame.
Now, I think, and you have told me, or we have talked about it maybe at the Love Your Work event too, but so for any person who's looking for a job right now, so for one person that's looking for a job, how many opportunities?
So in October, which is the most recent available now, it's 3.5 job opportunities for every one person that's seeking.
So one person's looking for a job and they have 3.5 opportunities in front of them.
Yeah. So if you spin that around, then if you're an employer, it's like the equivalent of having 0.3 job seekers for your job opening. And what are the odds, that even if it was 1-to-1, what are the odds that the one person who's lining up with your job vacancy has the skill set or the experience or the training that you're desiring? I mean, it's really difficult to do talent matching when it's this tight.
Well, talent matching, and also as the employer who has that opportunity, really thinking about ways to set yourself apart. How do you differentiate yourself from those other opportunities that person looks at you in a different way, that wants to be a part of your team when comparing to the other opportunities?
Yeah, writing job descriptions becomes way more important. You know, benefits, company culture, wages obviously matter a great deal. Flexibility in terms of, you know, maybe schedule flexibility or allowing remote working, or you know, there's lots of different ways that you can kind of differentiate yourself. So we've worked with like the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and they've done studies on what are people actually looking for, like what's most important to them as they decide where they want to work. Well, obviously pay is always the most important thing, but a lot of people now are looking for the opportunity to telework, you know, at least some part of the time. And that makes a lot of sense for certain businesses. It makes it, you know, it's not going to work out for other ones. Like if you're a construction firm, you have to have that person on site, or installation, maintenance, and repair, or you know, food service. You have to be on site for those types of things, and that can make it more challenging to find people as well.
Yeah, and you know, when we spoke about this at our Love Your Work retreat, I think our Wyatt Allen, he had some really valuable information just from, you know, he's a young guy. He's a younger person in the workforce. I don't know, 22? Yeah. So, but he had shared, right. He had shared that like throughout maybe his high school or college experience, you know, working different jobs, like what really mattered in finding a job and hanging around there was the culture of the place that he was working, you know, to feel like he was valued, to feel like there was a team mentality where you could make friends and meet people. I think that was what was really important. So I think that culture, and also just the ability to work at your own, not work at your own rate, but the opportunity to do your job, but do it the best way that you can do it. You know, offering people the flexibility to move forward in their path that really gets them to be successful. Yeah. So I think as employers, looking at opportunities to give your employees empowering them to be the best they can be in the position they are, but also just looking at your workplace in general, like seeing where they fit to make them feel valued, you know, and that they're giving something back to your business. That's what people want. They want to know that they're good at what they're doing and that they're building a business with you, right?
Yeah.
Really well said. Not to brag, but Wyatt's on the Red Star team now.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we live up to that expectation.
You know, Minnesota's quit rate is lower than what it is nationally. So I think, you know, that is the culture of workers in Minnesota, is they're willing to be loyal. But in an economic environment like this, it's much easier for them to look around and see, you know, is there something better? And it's not always just based on money. You know,
right.
Money certainly is a big part of it, but you know, the things that you can do to differentiate yourself are very important, because people would probably, you know, all things being equal, would choose to be loyal if they can. And that's valuable to the employer as well. You've got all those skills and all that experience that they've built up, the knowledge base that they've built up. So if you can afford to keep them rather than, you know, lose them and have to try and find someone else in
right.
this environment, it's definitely worth it.
And you kind of touched on it, but the daycare issue that we're facing as a state, it's huge, and I know it has a big effect. So allowing that flexibility, or the, you know, the work from home, or the flexible hour thing, it can make a really big difference for people who are dealing with daycare and child placement and everything else. I mean, that can be a deal breaker.
Absolutely.
Of what your flexible schedule could be.
Yeah, we saw elder care become more of an issue this time around too. That wasn't really something that was talked about. I'm sure it was an issue before, but it wasn't really talked about in the mainstream as much. And this time it seems like the pandemic changed that. So, yeah. Which
makes sense. I mean, when you said that population, that workforce that you're looking at, the 29 to 55. Was that the age range that you said?
25 to 54, but close enough.
25
we do it all
to
the time.
54.
Yeah, so.
But I mean, that's the population. That's the time in your life where you're caring for everybody. Like you've got, there's kids, there's the elder care, like you said. So yeah, flexibility to keep those people in the workforce. That's a big deal.
Yep.
Especially women.
Yeah, especially women. Yep. And Minnesota has a really high labor force participation rate for females. We were number one up until the pandemic. Now I think I'm sure we're still top 5. I haven't looked off the top of my head recently, but I'm sure we're still top 5. So it's a much bigger deal here than it is in a lot of other places.
Interesting.
Yeah, that also factors into those demographic difficulties we were talking about. So I'll go through this just really quickly because it probably won't be super relevant. But as I had noted, the June and July 1.8% unemployment rate was the lowest on record, not just for our state, but for everywhere. But what's interesting about this recession, this pandemic recession, we are not currently in a recession, but the one that we just came out of, has had like these two contrasts. So we had the highest unemployment rate on record in May of 2020, which is when everybody was being laid off.
Right.
And
Shut down.
Yep. Temporary layoffs, but at the same time, significant layoffs. So that was the highest on record. And then within, 2 years of that time, we've seen the lowest rate on record. That's not typically the way that recessions work. Usually that unemployment rate goes way up and it kind of stays there and slowly works its way back down. And usually what we see too in recessions is that people come into the labor force because like if their spouse, their partner lost a job, they'll come in and take a job on a short-term basis to try and increase income. And it's harder to get jobs then. There's just less openings at the time. And this one was just the complete opposite. Like everything got turned on its head. So kind of goofy to see that though, how the highest rate ever and the lowest rate ever within the same 2-year period. Again, only about 66,000 unemployed workers in the entire state of Minnesota. That's just a ridiculously low
Okay,
number.
so unemployed workers, what's the demographic, the age demographic of that person? Like, do they have to be in that number? Do they have to be over 18?
16.
They have to. Okay, so it's 16
Yep.
to 65.
No, any age. There's no upper limit.
16 up.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
But how do you know if they're looking for a job or if they've decided to retire? Like, how do you in the
So
data?
this data actually comes from something called the Current Population Survey. So we have, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has a team of people who are calling households that are in this sample, or a lot of households actually are now tracked electronically. Like they just go in and fill out the survey every month online.
Really?
Yep. And so they'll ask them all those types of questions. Do you have a job? If you don't, are you actively seeking a job? If you aren't actively seeking, why not? Are you retired? Are you sick? Are you discouraged? Are you working part-time but would prefer to be working full-time? All those different types of questions.
All right.
Have you looked within the last year? Have you looked, all that kind of stuff.
Census type stuff.
Yep,
I
but
guess.
it's a sample, so and it's
Yep.
a small sample in the state of Minnesota. It's about 900 households. So, I mean, there were some challenges in getting high enough response rates during the pandemic because
Sure.
you couldn't interact with people the way that we did in the past. But it's ended up being pretty reliable long term. There probably were some short term issues with it, but
Sure.
and so I mean it's just an estimate. Like, I have the number 65,873. That seems incredibly precise.
It really does. That's
It
why
is.
I was wondering.
Yeah, I mean it's somewhere around that number. So we just round it and say it's like 66,000 unemployed workers.
Okay.
It could be somewhere. It could be a little bit higher. It could be a little bit lower. It also is reflecting just a reference week. So it's whatever week includes the 12th of every month. So those people could have been unemployed that week and then gotten called back the week after,
Right.
or been interviewing and then get placed in a job.
Right.
So there's
Okay.
always fluctuations in this data that are happening. This is the size of the labor force again, just completely crazy in comparison to any other past time period or recession. We had been seeing really strong labor force growth through the first half of this year, really all the way through July, and then August we started to see this slight downturn, and so that's a little bit concerning too. Not sure what that means yet, if we've peaked and those people are not planning on coming back, or if it's just a blip in the sample and we'll start seeing it go back up again. But the good news is we have over the last year seen a fair amount of labor force growth, people coming back in, and again, thank goodness for teenagers. They did a great job of filling in those jobs over the last 2 years, but we are still down in comparison to the pre-pandemic employment level and labor force level.
Can you expand on that a little bit, that teenager comment? Because, I don't know, I think it's a point of contention sometimes when people comment about workforce. What exactly do you mean by teenagers? stepped up.
Yeah, so if you look at, so we have some data through a program called Quarterly Workforce Indicators, which allows us to share UI wage records with the Census Bureau, and then they can match that up to demographic characteristics like age or race or gender or educational attainment. And if you look at the number of job holders by age group, the age group that's running farthest ahead of its pre-pandemic employment level is teenagers, and it's not even close. Like, teenagers have come into the labor force in really large numbers. And that is different than what we had seen over the past 10 years. Teenage labor force participation rate had been dropping long term because, believe it or not, most teenagers are really busy. Like, they've got school,
Absolutely.
and they've got extracurriculars, and they've got other things that they're doing. And so, like, the perception always is, these kids, they don't want to work. Well, thank goodness we had kids, because they are the ones who came in and took these jobs. And part of it is probably because wages went up in those low-skill, entry-level type jobs. So, maybe 2 years ago, the idea of working in a retail store and, dealing with complaints and difficulties for...
That doesn't happen in retail.
But at $9.50 an hour, right? Then you might think, I got enough stuff going on. But at $17 an hour,
right,
it's a different calculation. Then you say, I'll do that. I'll put up with some complaining,
right,
and some stocking or whatever it ends up being, food prep, that type of work. So that's been actually a really positive thing, and that allows those students to have some, financial stability, maybe start saving for whatever their next stage in life is, whether they graduate and get a job or graduate and decide they want to go to college. Maybe they just want to buy a car or some nice shoes or whatever.
So we've heard through our business reinvention program and even our startup boot camps, we've had some entrepreneurs that are a little bit hesitant on hiring the younger age range for their businesses. Maybe it's that they don't want to hire a teenager because it's so much training and it's their first job and they don't understand how to mail a package and they've never had to do a lot of the things,
Sure.
So it's such an investment. But like, just from my personal experience, when we had the store, teenagers are how we ran it, and we would oftentimes look for hiring like younger, like when they're 15, because we found that if we created the culture and had the flexible scheduling that we could, we'd hang on to an employee for 6 years. They'd come back in the summers throughout college, they'd come back for holiday seasons, they'd work when they could. And also it was really great because they'd look for hours, but Saturdays are fine, that'd be great, yeah, I'll work a Saturday. Or if they needed a few extra hours, they'd come in after a sport to steam or to stock or whatever. So I think the key thing when you're looking at hiring teenagers, and we've heard it from our small business owners too, is it's worth the investment of the training, making sure that they fit, into the culture of your business. Sure. And you can tell that at 15 or 16, but then too, like offering them a flexible schedule, because they, like you said, they've got so many extracurriculars and they've got parents who want them to go on family vacations, which they should, they're teenagers. Yeah. But like being able to work around those schedules and being really open and honest in that hiring process that, we offer flexible scheduling, but when we need you to step up, we expect you to step up over here and we'll all work together as a team. But that was, if we didn't have teenage employees, it would have been, it would have been almost impossible. Like we would hang on. Yeah. And, still also, we would also, in our later years, we're able to hire out of that retired demographic. Yeah. And that was so huge for us. So our teenagers were able to come in after school, and our retired demographic would, be able to come in the mornings. Sure. But the opportunity for these young employees to be working with a seasoned person with experience, like just the natural mentorships that also happened out of that was a really cool benefit. Like the relationships that they made together, like to have a 16-year-old and a 66-year-old that really got along well, and that they could it was a really kind of a magical thing that happened. Like they all blended really well, and that if we didn't hire out of those demographics, we wouldn't have been able to survive.
Yeah, I think too, having those cross-generational workplaces, you can really benefit from the skill sets that each of them bring. One of the things that stuck with me from the Academy presentation was somebody had said, I just videotape myself doing a training session. So that way every new person that came on, they could just watch it. Well, that's actually how a lot of teenagers like to learn. They just watch stuff on YouTube. And you can get a lot of benefit because they'll watch something like that and then they'll try it. And I mean, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but you know, they'll say, well, this is inefficient. This is dumb. We should do it a different way. And you'll be like, okay, you know, you go ahead and try it. You know, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't work. But new thinking sometimes can be really helpful. It can be a burden to have to hold hands through some of this stuff that you'd think would be, you know, should be self-explanatory.
Right.
But yeah, you know, teenagers can be great additions. And again, thank goodness that we had them in Minnesota, because we wouldn't be where we are right now, which is still behind where we should be without teenagers.
And just, I mean, like, teenagers have hustle too. Like,
Yeah.
I was always, like, some of our employees already started side businesses, you know, through like just their experience that they'd have. Maybe they started a photography business while they're in high school. So they're like, their knowledge of social media and photography and picture taking, it was like, it was so valuable on our side to be able to have them. So, you know, you do like cross promotion. So we'd help promote their businesses and they'd help promote our businesses, or like the things that they are doing. I mean, they're smart. They've got access to the entire world, right, in their hands all the time. They're learning constantly. So it was pretty amazing, like what these young people are doing with their sports and with their family activities and everything else too. It's kind of exciting to see them coming up into our, like, you know, into our careers or into the career force, because they've got a whole different set of skills.
Yeah. And millennials, that's a huge generation, like almost the same size as the baby boom generation. And then Generation Z is coming into the labor force now too. And yeah, that is where the vast majority of labor force growth is going to happen. So the skills that they're learning as teenagers is also making them more valuable, you know, whatever they decide to do with their career path. So, I mean, it's a benefit in all ways, virtuous circle.
Yeah.
So this just shows that everywhere is dealing with this. There aren't any counties really that are immune to this tight labor market. So, you know, if the idea is, well, maybe we can just expand where we're marketing to, you know, and try and draw workers from surrounding counties. You know, that's certainly an option. You know, if someone can get a shorter commute, maybe they'd be interested in doing that. But they all have tight labor markets too. There really isn't any part of the state where you can go and just find a massive surplus of workers. Candy-Ojai County's unemployment rate in October, it looks like it was 1.5%. That's ridiculous. That's too low, right?
Wow.
So again, I think I had said there's like 23,000 workers. Only 330 of them are saying that they don't have a job and they're actively seeking. That's just a really small number. I'm sure we have way more than 500 job openings in Candy-Ojai County. So again, you know, more jobs than there are people who are seeking. Most counties are seeing labor force declines, so that isn't really anything unique to this area either. Again, statewide, about 0.3 job seekers per vacancy in 2021, and we've seen sustained high numbers of vacancies so far this year. Like I think September, there was like 214,000 job vacancies in Minnesota. So that
crazy high. Just remind me of a story of one of our entrepreneurs that we have. So he now owns 2 businesses, and when he opened up a new one, how long is the first business he's owned for 3 years?
Donnie?
Yeah,
probably.
about 3 years. And then he just recently opened up a coffee shop too. And one of our questions that we had him on a round table, was like, well, how are you finding employees? You know, these are, you know, for a restaurant and now a coffee shop. He's like, yeah, I got a line. But it's because he builds this culture, and he has a lot of young people as his employees, a lot of teenagers, a lot of people in school. But even when you follow like his social media, he closes the restaurant on prom weekend. So his employees can all go to prom and have fun, you know? And so like he's building this culture that really is embracing these young people, and they know it. And the cool thing about hiring a teenager or somebody in their high school years too, is oftentimes they have a sibling.
Sure.
So when you start hiring in, and like I think in Donnie's case, like people they started working at the restaurant. Now when he's opened up this coffee shop, oh my gosh, my brother would love to get a job. He's 15. Can he start working? You know, they understand that he's built this culture, and it's feeding both of his businesses. So he's got his employees, he's got staff, and they really love working for him because I think he offers something different in that area, that he recognizes the need for flexibility, and also that these teenagers, they have the ability to do the work, you know?
Yeah,
But
that's impressive. Donnie should reach out to Career Force MN and then
Yeah.
have him come in as like a subject matter
well,
expert. On
Donnie is a force in himself, so he
Donnie.
can be at the career force. He is a force.
All right.
Yeah.
If you're out there, Donnie, we love Donnie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we could use some of those insights.
Yes.
So this chart just shows the change in the labor force for the state of Minnesota each of these last 3 decades, and again kind of paints that same picture that first chart showed, how rapidly Minnesota's labor force was growing. So in the 1990s we had exceptional economic growth, but it was made possible because we had so many workers coming in, so many graduating from high school and college, and females joining the labor force. Slowed down significantly in the 2000s, but there were 2 recessions during that time frame. Sped up again a little bit in the 2010s, and you can see like toward like 2014, 2016, 2018, those were big years of growth. Those are when the labor market was starting to get so tight that wages were starting to increase for job offers,
Right.
and the older workers' labor force participation rates were working their way upward. People were staying in longer. And then, of course, 2020 to 2021 is kind of that blip, but we'll hopefully eventually get them back. My
It's
next
going to
slide
be a
will-
blip on that for a long time,
Yeah,
for years to come.
it will throw off. Like all of our charts are going to look well, they already kind of look silly. But so this is the Southwest Initiative Foundation. Again, that's the 18-county region here. You know, significant labor force growth during the 1990s, much slower growth during the 2000s. And then you can see already here, starting in 2010, our labor force was already starting to decline. And it's primarily due to the region's older demographics. Like we had that front end of the baby boom generation started reaching retirement age, and we're staying out of the labor force more. And then if you look at Candiota County, this just shows the last 20 years. I have the same chart I could do that for any county if anybody's interested in it afterwards. But this just shows that, you know, again, crazy blip that happened from 2020 to 2021. But otherwise, Candiota County, you know, kind of is a beacon in Southwest Minnesota. It's one of the larger counties, one of the fastest growing counties, with Wilmer as a regional center. So this is the chart. So if we did that same chart and we looked out 10 years into the future, this is what it would look like. So, you know, in the 1990s, we were averaging 41,000 new workers per year. This would average us about 8,600 new workers per year. So significantly slower than what we saw, you know, during those boom times. It is, thankfully, though, still expected to see growth. And this is based on a comparison of population projections from the State Demographic Center by age group, and then using current labor force participation rates for those age groups to say, we believe if, you know, there's X number of people in this age group and it has this labor force participation rate, it would lead to this number of people. Again, these look hyper-specific, right? You know, they're 160,000, 866. So, you know, the real number is going to be somewhere around there. It could be higher, it could be lower, but.
So looking at this, if you're an employer and you needed to find an employee, where would you look?
Well, so there's 2 areas, you know, really that are seeing new and exceptional growth. Like the prime working years, the 25 to 54, that's where you get the vast majority of your workers, you know, and they have skills, they have experience, all of that kind of stuff. But you can see here again, you know, moving forward, we're actually expecting to see some growth in that entry-level workforce, so teenagers and all the way up to 24-year-olds. You know, that's a great group to tap into. Again, you know, I think in Minnesota there's a tendency toward loyalty, so you do see some job hopping in those youngest years, but you know, sometimes it's, you know, working at a coffee shop as you're going to college to get trained to be a software engineer or something.
Yeah.
Right? So that's, you know, you're changing jobs, but that's part of life. That's part of growing and career development. The other area that's expected to see some growth is the 65 and over category as well. So we do believe that at some point these workers will come back into the labor force for whatever the need is. You know, if it's just to stay active, if it's to earn a little extra money, if it's to get benefits, you know, all of those are reasons that people may come back in. But, you know, if labor force participation rates keep increasing for older workers, that number will actually even get bigger. So it's a little weird to think, you know, you're doing your long-term workforce planning and thinking about hiring someone that's 65 years old, but that really is a decent strategy, you know, if you have work that lines up with what their interests are and their skills are.
Well, absolutely, and to be an attractive opportunity for somebody in that age range. I don't know. I'm willing for input and ideas, but like I also feel again flexibility and scheduling would be a very big piece of that because they've got plans. You know, they still want to live their retired lives. They did the buckle down thing, but they're willing to put in the time as long as you recognize too that, you know, they're going to want vacations or grandkid time and trips, and offering that flexibility would keep them around for years too.
Yeah, it's probably not a traditional 40-hour-a-week grind. It's probably more like we actually rehired someone that retired from our staff, and he works 10 hours every pay period, which is 2 weeks. So, you know, it's not a lot of work, but thank goodness we have him because he's doing valuable stuff that we don't have time for ourselves. And he already has all the skill sets. There's no training involved. We just... you know, tell him, hey, here's the project we want you to work on, and he does it. And so I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities like that where if you can just match up with what their demands are with what you need to get done, there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, and sometimes doing that, it's going to require rethinking or reinventing how your business is working. You know, kind of looking at your business in a new way to see, I don't know, how we can do it differently.
Right. Business model wise or process wise, or
Yep. The other note that I'll make on there too, so there's a huge opportunity in Minnesota to hire immigrants. You know, that really was the lifeblood of our economic growth over the last 10 years. Between 2010 and 2020, the foreign-born population was almost half of our labor force growth. And that number started to shrink these last 4 years, and then essentially slowed down to just a trickle since the pandemic. Like there just wasn't as much free movement. But, you know, long term, that's going to be vital for Minnesota's labor force growth is bringing new people in and getting them plugged into communities and plugged into jobs. And sometimes there's barriers for people who are coming from a different country. You know, they might have language barriers, or their education might not match up with what ours is. You know, they might have a certification for something from their country that doesn't meet the certification standards here. And so figuring out how to match those things up better, super important. I will just note, I think I have, so the Southwest Initiative Foundation, you know, again, I was talking earlier, this isn't a new problem, and it's also not going to be here for a short amount of time. This is going to be with us for the foreseeable future as that baby boom generation continues to age through the population pyramid here. So you can see the Southwest Initiative Foundation expected to lose over 11,500 workers, much more substantial decline than other parts of the state, primarily due to the region's aging population and you know, so, but even within that, there are some really encouraging trends, right? So, you know, people kind of lament how we lose our young people, but every county actually loses their young people unless they have a 4-year university. So you can look at migration patterns in the state of Minnesota, and any county that has a 4-year university has an in-migration. Any county that doesn't has an out-migration, including metro counties. So it's not like it's a rural phenomenon or anything like that. But
it's a good distinction.
I was just going to say, that's nice to hear.
Yeah. There's a guy named Ben Winchester from the University of Minnesota. He would be a great person to talk to as well. So he identified, you know, how, you know, people lament that all the time, like we have this brain drain. And he said, well, you know, you're only looking at one part of the story then. He's identified this migration pattern for 35 to 44-year-olds who have been moving back toward rural areas. He calls it brain gain. And it's people, you know, they've already established their careers. They've got college degrees, they've got stable jobs and high incomes, and they just decide, I want something different with my life. I want a slower pace, safer neighborhoods, smaller schools, different job opportunities. And they move out and they bring their kids with them. And so like we see, this encouraging amount of growth. It gets masked inside, the aging of the population, but it's a really positive trend. And a lot of it is happening without us doing anything. So like, what if we were really aggressive about marketing the opportunities for people in that brain gain population to come back out? Some regions have started doing that already. So like EDR6W, the Upper Minnesota Valley Regional Development Corporation, they've done this Get Rural campaign and tried to bring people in like that. The West Central Initiative Foundation is doing that as well. So there are opportunities to try and bring people back in that age range, which is helpful. And then the foreign-born population, almost all immigrants are in those prime working years, like between 25 and 54. So they're obviously a prime group to be tapping into as well.
On that subject, we talk a lot about accommodating teenagers and older people. I don't see a lot of businesses prioritizing accommodating for, for language barriers, for cultural type differences. What's your take on that, and what do we need to be thinking about to be better employers to more diverse populations?
Yeah, some businesses do, and that's part of their workforce strategy. They've been integrating foreign-born workers for generations at this point. And Wilmer is a really good example of that. Wilmer has a very diverse population. So I think, all those opportunities exist, but it's reaching out to the partners who can help with that. So like adult basic education or the career force system, the workforce development system can help with all of that. Setting up training sessions like English as a second language sessions at your business, or working it around whatever your schedule is. So like, let's say if you're running a shift from 7 until 3, and then from 3 to 5, you could have an adult basic education instructor come in and teach English as a second language to those employees, and then you just pay them for an extra 2 hours of work or something. Or maybe you make it part of the workday overall. There's lots of examples of companies that have done it successfully, but not very many companies have made that move.
I haven't heard a lot of people recognizing the opportunity to say, in fact, I brought it up in a meeting the other day with a pretty big company, and they kind of said, well, we're not there. We don't need that yet. We're not there yet. We don't have that kind of workforce population right now. Maybe in the future. And I would argue that you can kind of flip that and say, well, there's a reason you don't have it now, and could you have a stronger workforce if you were more accommodating? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and if you look at the workforce of the future, it's going to be way more diverse. So you can look at student enrollments through the Minnesota Department of Education. The student population is way more diverse than the overall population. Right. So those are the kids that are, in kindergarten through 6th grade now are going to be in the workforce 10 years from now. That is what your workforce is going to look like. And so creating those partnerships and building those inroads is extremely important.
So you're saying starting now, so start making those steps now, so just eventually it evolve so you're ready.
Well, I would even argue there's opportunity now that they're not capturing because they have nothing in place, or very little in place. I don't mean to say nothing, but it's not a priority, I guess, maybe is what I worry about. And it's an opportunity sitting there, so rather than continue to feel like you're hitting your head against a wall, that you can't hire people, I think they're not maybe considering that as a viable investment to make to get more workforce opportunities. Is that fair to say?
Makes sense.
But I think the point is the numbers confirm that it's worth the investment. The trends confirm that that's where we do need to be looking.
Yeah, long
and
term.
Investing. Yep. Yeah.
Absolutely. So this just shares some information on labor force participation rates by age group. And I had talked about this quite a bit before, but you could see that labor force participation rates had been climbing for older workers over time. So between 2000 and 2020, It went from 22.7% for workers aged 65 to 74 up to 28.4%. You know, if it keeps following that same trajectory, maybe it's 30% by 2030 or something along those lines, maybe even higher. So there's going to be more older workers available. The teenage labor force participation rate had been declining, although I will note, like you can see here, the difference between us and the United States as a whole. We have a really high labor force participation rate in Minnesota. We're just hardworking people in general, which is good, but also creates this challenge when you have a tight labor market. Like there isn't really anybody sitting on the sidelines that you can just easily go and grab and bring in. So you can see like teenagers in Minnesota, 52% labor force participation rate. I would assume that that number is going to go up. So when we see the 2021 data and beyond that, it's probably going to go even higher compared to 38% in the U.S. as a whole. But the population, because of these changing demographics, you know, our workforce is going to continue skewing older. A higher percentage of the total labor force is going to be in the older age groups, unless something significant changes, unless there's some way for us to bring in a lot of younger workers, like foreign-born population. And then long COVID, I'll just make a real quick note about that. That's another thing that kind of is, you know, perhaps keeping some people out of the labor force longer. They've got complications from COVID, and you know, I don't know anything about, you know, how that gets treated and what some of the, you know, the symptoms are different for different people. And so that's kind of another one where we just don't know how long, how quickly those workers will be able to come back in. But it is important to point out, so Minnesota's population with a disability has much lower labor force participation rates than the population overall. So it's like 50% versus 70%. So figuring out a way to help workers with disabilities come into the labor force is another really good strategy for the state of Minnesota, another good strategy for employers. You know, there's going to be some barriers in figuring out how to make it work, but if you can, you know, you can get a really skilled, really loyal employee that can come in and fill that role hopefully for a long
time.
A long time, yep. So, you know, it feels like a big short-term investment, but it might end up paying off in the long term. And so, you know, even if you could change the participation rate for workers with disabilities from 50% to 60%, well, that's a significant number of people in the state of Minnesota. And, you know, that can help fill a lot of these jobs that we currently have available.
And the Career Force also has resources.
Yep. So we've got a vocational rehabilitation team. They'll come out and meet with you. They'll walk you through the process of creating accommodations and you know, check in with the workers to make sure that it's fruitful for both sides, that things are going well. You know, they'll find the people. They are also working in a lot of schools.
Yep.
So again, you know, you're creating this pipeline, you know, workers that might be a good short-term solution now, but 10 years from now, they're going to be, you know, in the prime working years. And
and oftentimes, you know, those people have so many things in place too in their local communities that they don't want to leave. It's maybe, you know, it's where they have their support systems, their help, their, you know, the medical systems that they've been a part of for years to come, that they're established roots in their community, and this is where they want to stay. So being able to reach out and find an employment opportunity that meets their needs and that they can really be great at, that's a huge opportunity for a long-term employee.
Yeah, and maybe it's just overcoming you know, some kind of disability that you can easily fix with an accommodation for a computer system, or maybe it's a transportation issue, you know, and if you can just get the person to work, fill that role. So
feels like we just need to shake up our thinking.
We do,
just need to,
and that's never easy.
It's not easy, but I think sometimes life forces us to, and we look back later and go, yeah, I needed that shake. Or maybe really good things can come out of the process of it that we didn't even see coming.
Yeah, this is that opportunity. This is the shake.
This is the shake.
This is time to start thinking outside of what's always been done.
In the same way we had to rethink how we serve our customers. We have to rethink how we find employees and serve employees.
Right.
So, yeah, I think you've given us a lot of ideas to be really hopeful and positive about. Really.
Yeah, there's still tremendous opportunity moving forward. You know, Minnesota does have a great labor force. It's highly educated. It's hardworking, and again, you know, lower quit rates, longer employee tenure, and that's true. So we haven't done a repeat of this survey, but like 20 years ago, we did a survey on employee tenure, and what we found is that in Greater Minnesota and Region 6E, we had, so that's the 4-county region here, they had even higher median employee tenure than other parts of the state. So, which that can also be kind of a double-edged sword too, because if you're a young person and you say, oh, I really would like that job, you know, that looks like a perfect job for me, but the person who's in it is going to be there for the next 25 years, you know, that might force them to think, oh, well, how do I get into it? Maybe I need to go somewhere else or look for that opportunity somewhere else. But, you know, for employers, that long-term loyalty really tends to be a positive thing.
Yeah, for sure. I think to really motivate people too, you know, all our small businesses are trying to compete, and they're competing for employees just like anything else. So now I think what you've done is given them some opportunities to think about how to compete, because this is going to be a slow change. People are not going to be quickly able to address these new opportunities. So the people that can move faster have the edge, would you say?
Yeah, and small businesses have the ability to move quickly.
Right.
They can make changes and implement them the next day.
Yep.
That's a huge benefit that small business owners have.
Yeah, so game on.
Game on.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be talking to everybody and be like, I'm fully staffed,
Yeah.
tried new things, this is the best. So,
Yep.
right.
Well, this has been great. I think it worked. I mean, I'm not going to brag about how many people we had joining us, but the amount of people that are going to watch this at some point and gain lots of inspiration.
My mom and my dad.
Yeah,
Oh.
my mom, my dad.
So we had at least 4 people watched. That's good.
We can get Gina's husband.
Oh, yeah. On board.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
No, our alumni are busy people, and I think they do appreciate having the resource, but having
Absolutely.
flexibility on how to get to it. So,
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
For sharing. Now, did you have the website on a slide?
Let's see what I got here.
Oh, boy.
we didn't even get through the good
Oh,
stuff.
my goodness.
Yes, there. So this is the
Okay.
team, right? So
All
we've got
right.
5 people. So no matter where you're located in the state, many of you hopefully already know Luke. That would be the regional analyst for most of the people. But no matter where you are, so Northwest, Northeast, Southeast, Twin Cities, we've got somebody who can help you out. You can go onto our website, find all of this type of information. If you ever have questions, we are a pretty accessible crew, so you can just send us an email or give us a call and say, I'm trying to look for wages for you know, servers or waiters and waitresses. What's a reasonable market wage? We can provide that type of information.
Wow.
It's an
a huge
amazing
resource.
discovery. Not only that the data's there and the expertise, but your willingness to help and walk alongside businesses is kind of unbelievable. I'm assuming everyone in this diagram is just like Cameron, and that they're very
Better.
They're
Yep.
wow.
Younger.
Okay, guys,
smarter.
the bar's really high. But just to
Oh,
feel,
right.
I think for business owners
Yeah.
to get help and not feel like they're asking for a favor or it's inconvenient, you're always so eager and willing that it feels good to ask versus it feels stressful to ask.
Absolutely.
Yeah, our goal is to be a resource. You've already paid for us, so you might as well get some benefit from us, and especially small businesses. You know, if the time that it might take for them to dig through our website and find the piece of information, you know, if that takes a half hour or an hour or something, you can just call us and in 5 minutes have the answer and plus some additional
Right.
insight. Hopefully, you know, that ends up being a benefit
Yeah.
for them, because we get it. We're busy too, but you know, we're busy serving you guys. So our goal would be to help make that process easier.
Fantastic.
Perfect. All right. Is that a wrap?